Hi, this is Joseph Knoll, and I'm going to be reviewing Before They Are Hanged by Joe Abercrombie. This is the second book in the First Law trilogy. The first book, I have authored here, the first book being The Blade itself, and the third book being The Last Argument of Kings. So this is the sequel to The Blade itself. We are a grimdark fantasy world, as I described in my first review, and I'm imagining if you are watching this review that you have read The Blade itself. I won't spoil anything. I might mention characters that were from the first book, but I won't be spoiling anything. So if you haven't read the first book, you can stick around for this one. But again, just start reading the book instead of watching this video, am I right? So Before They Were Hanged, I liked this book a lot. I would say I liked it a little bit more than the first book. I think that they're pretty close. I think the reason I enjoyed Before They Were Hanged more than I enjoyed The Blade itself is because I knew the characters. And so I didn't have to spend that, the first 50 pages trying to figure out who's who, where are we. So it's very much like the first book, character-driven story, but there is a lot more world building in this one. We're really experiencing the history of the First Law universe. It's when I read the first book, world building was something that wasn't a priority. It felt like the characters were the priority, and Joe Abercrombie didn't want to sacrifice any or a lot of page time for world building because he wanted us to be invested in the characters. But he really brought the world building into the second book. And now it's still a character-driven story. So when it comes to world building, we're still not nearly like a Brandon Sanderson or a Song of Ice and Fire level world building. We're still, less than them, but more than it was in the first book. And I actually think that was genius to add a lot of world building into your second book, because the first book, I feel like for a lot of people, this is including myself, it's a lot of work to start a fantasy series because you're kind of digging into the trenches. And I would say that the first book, I often view it as homework. I feel like I'm sort of doing homework so that way the sequels, because I'm invested in the characters, I can enjoy those even more. I feel like a lot of fantasy readers have this mentality that you want to read a trilogy, a quartet, or however many books, because once you get the first book down, the enjoyments of the next ones are a lot. But what I liked that Joe Abercrombie is the world buildings in the second book, and so I really got to get to know the characters in the first one. And then when the world building was brought up, I felt like it was appropriate. I was curious. I've been in this world. I kind of wanted to know more about it. And I thought that was very nice. And I always like world building through Gandalf characters. This book does have a Gandalf character. His name is Baez. He's like an old wizard, kind of ancient, has a lot of wisdom. He's a little bit kooky, a little crazy. He's kind of like Gandalf. Gandalf said the F word a lot. But most of the world building in the history is told through him and his experiences. And I love that in fantasy books. I could have old wizards telling young people about the history of the world all day, and I eat that up. I'm not going to get any specifics about the characters. There's Glocka, there's Logan, there's a whole bunch of cast of characters. I think that would be boring for this, and so I kind of want to get into sort of overarching things about the book. I'm going to say things I liked in the beginning, and then towards the end of the review, I'm going to have some critiques. I actually have more critiques with this book than I did with the first, because I was expecting something different. I would recommend, though, if you're watching this review and you haven't read the second book, maybe after I said my positive things, go ahead and leave the video and just enjoy the second book for what it is, because I don't want my negative opinions to cloud your reading experience. Negative opinions are usually things that you should be investigating after you've read it, because you want to have the clearest picture of what's going on. You don't want me influencing you. But anyway, enough of my tips. Things I loved about this book: the world building, as I mentioned. I thought that the battle scenes in this book. Again, there's one at the end in the north. I won't spoil it, but if you read the book, you know what I'm talking about. And it's just intense. It's insane. I feel like Joe Abercrombie, he grips me there. I feel like I'm next to them. And I can really feel the fear. Sometimes I imagine like what it would be like to run into battle, you know, me, like Joe, like with a sword. And I get like really scared. And this book does the exact same thing, but it's in another character's perspective. I feel like the character is feeling exactly how I would feel in that moment. And it just hits it perfect. And so the battle scenes in this book, every fight scene in this book is incredible. I liked the relationships. One of our cast of characters, there's 3 plots in this book, and one of the plots, a bunch of the main characters are together, and they weren't really that much in the first book, and so you kind of get to see them interact. And I kind of want to get into a specific interaction that I really liked. I mentioned Logan in my first review. He's sort of this warrior who's super famous in the North, who's like been in battle, is a badass, but he's like a kind of like a good person. You think you're not really sure, but he seems good on page. And then there's Giselle, who is this just noble young knight who's very good looking, a great fencer, but has never been in battle, so he's cocky as hell, and he doesn't want to be there, and he hates his life. You know, he's just like a teenager. And the father-son relationship between Logan and Giselle. Now, it's not, the ages like probably aren't that much, but you really get a mentor vibe here, where Giselle doesn't want to listen to Logan, and Logan doesn't really care if he listens, and then they're kind of forced to listen to each other because under like extreme circumstances. And that bond really gets me in books, like kind of like that mentor father-son bond. And it wasn't with the wizard, you know. Usually it's like Gandalf and Frodo. It's a couple of our fighting main characters, and it's a little bit of bromance. It's not that much. It's not a bromance, but I really enjoyed that. And I'm a little bit into the third book, and you kind of get a little bit more of that, and it really pays off. And the writing is hilarious. I've laughed out loud a few times. I was even like reading in bed once, and I was like cracking up all the time, and my wife is trying to sleep. She is like, "What is so damn funny?" And I'm like, "It's just Joe Abercrombie guy. He just gets me." His sense of humor is fantastic. I would say, especially with Logan and then Glocka, he does an excellent job. And I always feel like if you can make me laugh in a book, that you've nailed it when it comes to writing. So his writing style is very good. It is repetitive. It's repetitive on purpose. He's following patterns. A simple way to say this is that characters have catchphrases. For example, say one thing for Logan Nine Fingers, say that he's not a lover. Say one thing for Logan Nine Fingers, that kind of thing. And then it's kind of hard to give any examples. I'm going to ruin it. But he has like kind of like prose. His prose are sort of in like sets, and he repeats how they're kind of set, like a rhyme and a rhythm. And I actually enjoy that, because once I got the idea of what he's going for, when I was ready for once I sensed a pro was coming, I could really lock into it, and I thought that was good. And his prose, I would say, are pretty good. They're always in the beginning, him describing what's going on, usually, and mostly Glocka. His prose are excellent. Okay, so that's kind of all the positive things. I feel like I've gushed enough. If you haven't read this book, please read the first book. Read this book. You'll like it. It's a character-driven fantasy story. But I do have some critiques, so I'm going to get into those now. So if you don't want to listen to them, go away. I mentioned in my first review that the plots felt a little weak. I said that in the Blade itself, it felt like there wasn't any momentum towards an objective. It kind of felt like the set pieces, the major ones, sort of came in 2 chapters and were gone. I think that's fine if you kind of want to shock the reader, but I do like building towards something and having a big payoff. I find that to be like very satisfying in fantasy books, especially. And it wasn't that strong in the Blade itself. Well, before they were hanged, if you remembered, I mentioned that there were 3 plots. 2 of the plots. All right, this is going to get into a little bit of a spoiler, so I can explain it. The Glocka plot, he kind of goes on his own to a town in the south, does a bunch of stuff, is trying to defend the city from invading forces, and before the city is about to be invaded, he leaves on a boat and goes back to the city where he started in the book, and that's it. So he goes to this place, does a bunch of stuff there, but then just comes back. So the stuff that happened there doesn't really matter. There's only one thing that really matters that happened there. And it felt so cheap because I actually thought we were building towards something. You know, he's trying to figure out who's manipulating the city, how can we show our defenses and stuff, and then he just bails, and I really hated that. And then the same thing happens with the party I was discussing earlier. They're looking for an object. It's kind of their end task. This is a spoiler, so get ready. When they get to where the object should be, it's not there, and then they leave. They take a boat and they go back home where they started. So literally 2 plots. The characters started in the same city, they left, and then came back, and it was like they didn't even go. And I'm a little bit in the 3rd book, and they're not paying off. We're kind of forgetting about these things, and it's a kind of bullshit, honestly. It's pretty cheap. I'm forgiving him for this, and I'm still recommending this book because the character work in this book is amazing. The writing is great. The world building is solid. So there's enough here, right? Like, books don't have to be perfect for you to read them. Every book has its issues. But plot is definitely a Joe Abercrombie issue. He cannot get that down straight. Now I am into the 3rd book. I'm about 150 pages in. So, you know, this is the time for the plot. You know, this is time for things to build. You know, there's the thing in the north. That plot was good. You know, and it's keep that momentum going. But I was a little disappointed when it came to the plots. I don't see a lot of people mentioning that either. So I'm kind of curious what you guys think. Am I alone on this? Did you guys like the plots? Or were you like me and you kind of felt like everything got undone and kind of felt cheap? Please let me know. And thanks for watching.